You know, every single piece of clothing you own tells a story. Seriously, from the cotton in your t-shirt to the specific cut of your jeans, there's a whole history woven right into the threads. A history of power, of identity, and of a world that's way more connected than you might think. So let's pull back the curtain and find out what our clothes are really hiding.
Okay, we all know the story of Cinderella, right? The prince, the ball, the race against the clock, and of course that iconic glass slipper. But what if I told you that magical detail, the very thing the entire story hinges on, is probably based on a complete misunderstanding?
Well, a lot of historians think Cinderella's slipper was actually something more like this, a mule. And back in 17th century France, when this fairy tale was first written down, this backless, super fancy shoe was the height of fashion. This wasn't just something you wore on your feet, it was a major status symbol, made from expensive stuff like silk brocade for aristocrats who, let's be honest, barely had to walk at all.
So what this really means is the magic of the slipper wasn't about the material it was made from, but what it symbolized. The transparency was all about revealing Cinderella's true self. See, her family tried to bury her identity, calling her Ash Maiden, but the shoe proved her innate nobility. It was an object that made her authentic character totally visible, cutting right through that disguise of soot and rags.
And this idea that clothing reveals your true identity brings us perfectly to our first section, the wardrobe of power. For centuries, what you wore was a direct visual code for your status, your role in society, and even your gender. And trust me, some of those codes are going to surprise you.
Take a close look at this ancient Assyrian relief. Those aren't just any figures, they're warriors, archers to be specific. And what are they wearing into battle? Yep, skirts. For a huge chunk of history, the skirt wasn't just for men, it was a critical part of a soldier's uniform.
I mean, that just shows what a dramatic shift has happened. Back then, the skirt was warrior gear, a symbol of masculine power and status. But now, after trousers basically became the uniform of the modern world, the skirt has been completely regendered. Now it's associated with femininity, even with restricting movement, the literal opposite of where it started.
Of course, power dressing wasn't just for the battlefield. You also have figures like the dandy. Think of guys like Beau Brummel back in the 19th century. They used meticulous tailoring not just as fashion, but as a kind of social weapon, proving that you could wield power just as effectively with an immaculately tied cravat as you could with a sword.
But using clothes as a tool like that is just one layer of the story. Sometimes, a single garment can be this beautiful facade, hiding a whole world of contradictions. And that brings us to fashion's masquerade.
Take a look at this. This is the wedding dress of Mary Northcliffe, a 17-year-old from Yorkshire, England, who got married in 1807. At first glance, it's just a picture of innocence, right? It looks so light, free, and almost angelic. But this seemingly simple dress is performing a pretty elaborate masquerade.
The architectural theorist Mark Wigley has this brilliant phrase for it. He calls it transparent masking. The idea is that it's a mask that doesn't just hide you, it actively projects a whole new identity. It conceals just as much as it reveals. And Mary's dress, it's a perfect example.
So let's break that down. Here's the first contradiction. The facade of the dress, with its flowing lines and delicate fabric, it projects this image of freedom, of innocence. But the reality for a bride back then was the exact opposite. Marriage meant losing your property rights, your independence. So in a way, this beautiful gown was the uniform for her transition into a much more controlled and rigid life. But wait, there's another layer to this story. Mary wasn't some London socialite. She was from the provincial gentry way up in Yorkshire. And yet, her gown was incredibly fashionable, a perfect match for the latest styles coming out of Paris. It's just wild proof of how sophisticated the international fashion system was, even over 200 years ago, reaching way beyond the elite circles of the capital. But that international system wasn't just about style. The deepest secrets, well, they're woven into the material itself. This brings us to the fabric of society.
If we zoom way in, we can see the fabric, this beautiful, delicate Indian muslin. Now, this material was designed and made halfway around the world, specifically for the British market. And this is where a simple white dress suddenly reveals its part in a massive global story.
You know, the author Sophie Thanhauser puts it really well. She says that most of us today are divorced from our clothing by a complex, inscrutable system of global production. But as Mary's dress shows us, that system isn't new. We've been weaving a global and often pretty troubled history into our clothes for centuries. And this is where we get to the really dark irony hiding in this pure white dress. The material itself was a product of British imperial trade in India.
The silhouette, that high empire waistline, was actually inspired by the simple garments worn by enslaved people on colonial plantations. And the huge demand for this style fueled industrial mills back in England, including in Mary's home county, which were notorious for exploiting workers, especially children. Colonialism, slavery, and child labor are all invisibly stitched into this one single garment of innocence.
So, after pulling at all these different threads, what are our clothes actually saying? Let's try to weave it all together.
At the end of the day, from a warrior's skirt to a bride's gown, every piece of clothing is basically a historical document. It tells these incredible stories of power, of identity, and of our deep, sometimes invisible, connection to people and places thousands of miles away. It's a language we all speak, whether we even realize it or not. And that really just leaves us with one final question. Take a look down at what you're wearing right now, just for a second. Where did the material come from? Who do you think made it? What does its style say about power and gender and the exact moment in history you're living in? What stories are woven into your clothes?